Órale, bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. I'm your host, Jorge Martin, and we are going to the el norte, almost the Great White North, going to Buffalo. We're not going to be diving into any tables today, but Bills Mafia is in the house, and joining us, our invitado de lujo, Greg Tompsett. He is the host of the Cover One podcast, Cover One Buffalo. He also does a Cover One fantasy one, which is really cool because we can talk a little non-Buffalo fantasy at the end. But he's been covering the Bills for several years. He's obviously a longtime fan, and just so excited that he's here to talk about some Bills with us. Greg, otra vez, thank you so much. Muchas gracias for joining us.
No, I appreciate the invite, Jorge. I'm very excited to be able to talk about it. It's fun to finally be able to enjoy both the Buffalo Bills and fantasy football because I spent a lot of my time where those were very separate things because you never wanted to draft any Buffalo Bills for over a decade. So I'm excited that now my enjoyment of the Buffalo Bills can actually help fantasy football instead of the opposite.
Yeah, I think for me, I go back to the '90s playing fantasy football, so I had that triangle of that trio of greatness of Kelly,
Yeah.
Thurman Thomas, and Andre Reed several
I try to
times.
tell
So
people Thurman Thomas was Marshall Faulk before Marshall Faulk. Like he was the original yards from scrimmage, guy that really took it over. But yeah, it's certainly exploded and grown a lot since then.
yeah, those were the days of keeping stats in from the newspaper.
Yes. I used to do those USA Today salary cap leagues where you would like use the the amount of money they gave you and you'd have to mail it in and then try to keep track of everything. Those it goes back. It was a little more archaic back then. Now it's a little bit easier. I can just check on my phone and swipe through every lineup real quick. It's great.
I know that was the time when you could really only have one team because it's just like, yeah, can you imagine now the time where you could have like 10, 12 teams that you're trying to keep an eye on? It's like they're all on your phone, nice and organized. But and you mentioned being a Bills fan. I love the pin tweet on your profile, the Bruce Smith. How big of a surprise was that from a legend, an icon in Buffalo?
So it's pretty great. Anyone who hasn't seen it, you can see my tag here at Greg Tompsett. My wife, for my 40th birthday, I just turned 40 this spring, wanted to surprise me with something kind of different. In that I am a Bills fanatic, and they have every little possible decoration, tchotchke, anything that you can have Buffalo Bills. I probably already have it. And I joke all the time that I love the Buffalo Bills more than anything I'm not related to. And that my favorite player of all time is Bruce Smith. I played defensive line. I played D-line in college. He was my favorite player and just an icon, all-time sack leader in the NFL. Well, she found that he was new to the Cameo site and reached out to him to do a video for me about my birthday. And that, for anyone who doesn't remember, the old Dennis Hopper commercials back in the 90s where he would dress up as kind of this frantic official sneaking into the locker rooms, and he did the one where he talks about what Bruce does in his shoes is bad things, man. And that was a favorite of mine and my grandfather's. One of my favorite memories of him was saying that commercial and watching games with him before he passed away. So she had mentioned to Bruce it would be really cool if you could work that in to the video, and he did an awesome job with it about what happens when you turn 40 and what happens with your body and bad things, man. It's awesome. It's one of my prized possessions. I'll remember it forever, and I'm certainly way in the negative in brownie points with my wife. I got a lot of work to do to catch up.
Well, you know what? I think maybe when Brad Pitt does a cameo or something like that.
Yeah, I'll find some way to try to get myself back even.
Well, let's jump into the Bills, and I think it starts with the quarterback Josh Allen, the $258 million man. I don't think a lot of times quarterbacks make that big leap in year two. He did that uncharacteristic leap in year three where he just put it together. He became an MVP candidate. Great passing. I think that's well. Where did he just go from being a guy that you wanted to have on your fantasy because he could run in some touchdowns to
Yep.
oh my God, this guy's one of the best.
So, for anyone who is outside of the Bills, a lot of people would assume that Bills fans were just being fanatical and overly buying into, all the different narratives that were out there about Josh Allen. One of the reasons that I made such a quick switch, I was not a fan of him as a prospect. I saw what everybody else saw. I watched the film. I looked at the stats. It those kind of prospects and that combination just is an incredibly low probability of translating into the NFL. Once it happened, some of the things that it's not as though it wasn't out there, but that Bills fans, fanatically are going to consume all the content that's out there. You started to learn very quickly how smart he was, how hardworking he was, how little he had in development. He was not a big time prospect. He was a 0-star prospect. He had no scholarship offers. He wasn't in Elite 11 camps and these 7-on-7 summer leagues and all the different pieces that you do, that some of these guys come in with thousands of reps of professional, drop from center, 3-step drop, quick read, understanding. He was way behind that. And then went to Wyoming, went to junior college, really junior college, then transferred to Wyoming as his only scholarship offer, and then ran a option run-based offense with, no offense to the Wyoming coaches, but it's not exactly some high-flying, it's not Lincoln Riley out there developing professional quarterbacks. So what it meant was, it did not mean he was going to succeed. It did not mean that he was inevitably going to be good. What it meant was there was more capacity for improvement than a standard prospect coming out. That there was a wider range and variable of how much better he could get. And that when many guys take that second year leap, it's because that's kind of the finishing touches. That's the last pieces of it. And I'll add one piece. There was a scout, and this was a direct quote from an NFL scout during that 2018 process, saying that between Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen, that he had 10,000 more reps. And we kind of joked and was like, oh, like Malcolm Gladwell and the 10,000 hour rule. And he's like, no, I'm not exaggerating. We think that Baker Mayfield has thrown 10,000 more passes than Josh Allen in his life. And that you just can't make up for that kind of capacity. So I don't know that we're going to see additional improvement or another step forward. He just had, what would have been the MVP season in probably 48 of the last 50 seasons in the NFL. Just Aaron Rodgers happened to have a historically great season. So, I think some people talk about regression. I don't think regression needs to mean, crushing back down to earth. But if you look at after Peyton Manning's 55 touchdown season and Tom Brady's 50 touchdown season and Patrick Mahomes' season, you can take a step back and still be really good. So I don't know that I expect 4,900 yards and 46 touchdowns from Josh Allen again, but he could easily have 4,400 and 41 touchdowns, and that's a 10% regression across the board. So I still think this offense runs through him. He is the centerpiece of this offense. We're going to get to the running game here in a moment, but nothing is changing the fact that they're going to be the pass heaviest offense in the NFL, and that he's going to be one of the best running backs on the team. And that combination is, in my opinion, the second highest floor in fantasy besides Patrick Mahomes.
And because of the investment, do you still see them, having him run out there? Because he definitely puts his body into harm's way plenty of times.
So they're absolutely going to be in his ear about being smart about it. But if you watch, he did that last year. He ran less last year than he had before from a frequency standpoint, but he was still good when he ran, and the times when he runs is still in the red zone. So he's now gonna, he has Cole Beasley now as a check down option. You don't need to be the one on 3rd and 4 that you have to scramble for it. I have a guy who can get open. Now you add Emmanuel Sanders. You have Stefan Diggs. He doesn't need to be the guy to get those from 20 to 20. But when they get down in the end zone, down in the red zone, he's still a viable option and probably second to Cam Newton, one of the best red zone rushing quarterbacks that you can have. He's had 8 touchdowns each year. Maybe that's 5 this year. Maybe it's not 8 again. But I still think that with the floor that provides, you're still looking at 4 to 500 yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns solidly, and you add that onto the pass heaviest offense in the NFL, it's going to net out to a very safe floor. Over time, I'm sure they'll ask him to run less and less, but I actually think the high leverage opportunities will maintain pretty well.
Yeah, and those are the ones that end up being the most valuable ones anyway. Those are the ones that turn into touchdowns. So awesome, awesome. Running backs. I think this is one of those groups that's kind of a headache. There were, in early training camp, there was talk that maybe Zach Moss was taking a step forward. Then he pulls his hammy. Devin Singletary looks pretty good in the first exhibition game. Can you help our Familia community make heads or tails of how this running back group is going to go?
So the good news is they're all cheap. So at no point are you going to have to make a substantial investment in the Bills running game. So it's easy to take flyers in a piece of an offense that scored 500 points. So I am actually a sneaky Devin Singletary supporter. He looked awesome in the preseason game. He looked more explosive. They talked about the body transformation he went through. He looks way more muscular than he did before. Not that he was, every professional athlete's a pretty darn good athlete. He didn't look like a traditional NFL running back. He didn't look like Adrian Peterson out there with 0 ounces of fat. He kind of looked like an average guy a lot of the times. He's only 5'7". He's not that big of a dude. And he wasn't, chiseled in any way. He looked a lot more muscular this year, and he went through what he described as a ton of explosion and quickness and agility drills to try to get his acceleration improved. He's never going to be a 4.3 40 guy, but he's also faster than the 4.6 40 that he ran implied, because he has great short area quickness, contact balance, is able to keep his feet. Now, unfortunately, any upside, whether it's Zach Moss or Devin Singletary, is capped by the fact that the Bills pass the ball 72% of the time. So when your opportunity is that other 28, you have to go into the passing game. Well, last year, from a targets and catches opportunity, Singletary was 10 times what Zach Moss was. And he's getting, 50, 60 targets for 40 catches, and Moss was getting single digits. So I think that I understand the reports, and that there were some times where it did look like it was trending to get more touches to Zach Moss down the stretch last year. I would also caution people that a big part of that was, for a stretch there in the second half of the year, the Bills were blowing out everybody. And they had, 5-6 straight games, double-digit wins. Well, that meant in the fourth quarter, there was a lot of milking the clock carries. And those have value. Those are important, and I want a piece of that. But that doesn't always happen. I think the Bills are going to be very good again this year. I don't know that they're going to go on a 6-game stretch of double-digit wins back to back to back to back. In those stretches, if you go to the neutral game script scenarios within a score, the touches were much more even, or even in Singletary's favor. When it became 4-minute drill, of course you're going to give it to the guy who's 30 pounds heavier and 4 inches taller and is going to be able to do it. So I like Zach Moss. I think it's odd that Moss is going ahead of Singletary. I would take Singletary ahead. And when you tell me that you could wait 2 rounds and take a flyer in the 11th round on Devin Singletary versus a 9th round pick on Moss, I would take another receiver or a tight end or a quarterback in the 9th and wait and get Singletary later. They're both cheap. It's not going to cost you a lot, but I think there's a chance that Singletary could maintain that 60-40 split, be a little bit more explosive than he was in the past, and have better production in the passing game. So, I think there's more touchdown upside with Moss, but I actually kind of like the value of Singletary there. And I know a lot of people have been excited about Matt Breida. I think he's very much going to be a bit player, similar to how the Bills had TJ Yeldon last year. I don't know that we're going to see, there might be some game day inactives. If you have an injury to the top 2 guys, Breida would be a priority cheap waiver pickup for me, but I don't know that I'd go out of my way to draft him.
That's awesome. And you know what? Talking about Singletary again, getting those cheap running backs who catch passes, especially in PPR, are so valuable. I love how you broke that down. That was fantastic. I think that got me a little bit more thinking of Singletary as one of the, kind of like that third or that fourth running back that you grab in like the 10th or 11th round. So love it, love it. Well, one guy who's not going to be lasting into the 11th round, I don't think he's going to be going past the second round, is Stefon Diggs. I want to give him his own. He broke a narrative last year, which was you don't want to get the receiver changing teams.
Yeah.
So he and DeAndre Hopkins, I think, destroyed that narrative. I mean, can we see another just top 3 wide receiver season out of this guy?
So obviously last year, I think that there's a couple things in his favor to, I want to say repeat, but have another very strong season. And the offset is he actually had really bad touchdown luck, like just pretty randomly, not by any strategy. It's not like they had, the Bills don't have like a Rob Gronkowski or a Calvin Johnson, like where you're down in the red zone, or the way that the Packers used Devontae Adams. It's not like they had another guy that, oh, we're in the red zone, now we go to this guy. It was that the Bills broke the record, or tied the record last year for the most different players catching a touchdown pass. They had 14 different guys catch a touchdown pass. And that's great for the Bills. That's why they scored so many points. But it's also kind of random. Like, there's plenty of times where Stefan Diggs is going to be the guy who's open, and I think it's likely that he catches more touchdowns this coming year. And the reason I call that an offset is I don't think his overall spot from a target share percentage and the volume that he got is going to drastically change. But maybe it's 140 targets instead of 160. Maybe it's 102 catches instead of 117 or whatever it was. It was such a phenomenal season from a huge volume standpoint that he could still lead the team, be one of the top guys in the NFL, but maybe not the most targets and the most catches in the entire NFL. He could still have a very, very good season. I think he has, right there with Devontae Adams, I think you can argue Adams, this exact same statement, have the highest floors of any receiver in the NFL. He is going to be a top 6 to 8 receiver at the very, very worst, and has as good of a shot at number 1 as anybody. So when you're drafting that, and that I get him in the second, you get a stud running back, and you come back early, you're probably going to need to be at the end of the first round to get him early in the second. But if you're there at the turn and you get to walk away with a Austin Eckler and Stefan Diggs as your first 2 guys, that's a heck of a start to have a stud running back and a guy who's a staple wide receiver. He's one of the few exceptions. I like starting running back a lot this year with how quickly things drop off. My exceptions are if I get a chance at Devontae Adams or Stefan Diggs, their floor is so high, it's like drafting a running back.
And where do you stand on grabbing a tight end, one of the top 3 tight ends in those first 2 rounds?
I really like the top 3 in it because I hate how far it drops off after them. So Kelsey's right there for me. And then, depending on, it's very draft position dependent. If you have an early pick, I love the idea of getting one of those top backs, and you get, McCaffrey, you get Kamara, you get Cook, whatever your order is early on. If you're a Derrick Henry or a Zeke guy, oftentimes when you come back later in the second round, I'll take Waller or Kittle or whoever's there, and then take one of my other guys. I actually don't like it if I have one of the later picks, I get 2 studs, but by the time it comes back to the end of the third round, usually all the tight ends are gone, and I'm like, well, I'll see you guys in the 11th round. I'll pick a tight end later there. I'm all done for a while. But yeah, I do love snagging one of them, and that's a great combination to be able to do it. So if you're lucky and you get in a league that maybe thinks some regression is coming for the Bills offense, or that Josh Allen's going to take a big step back, I think everyone should be realistic that there is going to be some regression. It's probably not going to be top 2 in the MVP voting again. And the same thing, maybe Stefan Diggs doesn't lead the NFL in every category again. It's not going to be some huge step back. This offense is still going to be pretty good. Every coach is back. Every other piece is back. The top 10 out of 11 snap producers are back, and the one change was John Brown out and Emmanuel Sanders in, which I'd argue is a slight upgrade. So it's certainly going to be an explosive offense again.
Well, let's talk about those 3 receivers who are behind Stefan Diggs in the pecking order. You got Cole Beasley, you got Gabriel Davis is getting a lot of fans, fantasy players getting excited, and Emmanuel Sanders. How do you see kind of the targets breaking down with them after after Stefan Diggs leaves a few behind.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'll talk about different formats. So the more PPR heavy and the more redraft that you get into, the more I like Beasley and especially Emmanuel Sanders for the price. The more, if you're at half PPR or yardage only with no point per reception, and especially Dynasty, the more I like Gabriel Davis. For this season, Davis is going to be a definitive fourth option. He's not going to get as many targets as Beasley, Sanders, and obviously Diggs. Last year, if you look at his snap count percentage in the games with John Brown and without John Brown, it's a stark difference. And that there was a stretch where John Brown kind of tried to play and just tough it out through it. That's the part where Gabriel Davis had huge performances. When John Brown was healthy and it was Brown, Beasley, and Diggs, I mean, Gabriel Davis got fourth wide receiver snaps. And now in the Bills offense, with how often they go 10 personnel and four wide receivers and how often they pass, that was still a reasonable amount. But one, he had a really high touchdown rate, which everybody knows shows a lot of variance year to year. He likely wasn't going to get 8 touchdowns again on the number of targets he got this year, even if he got that same number of targets. And I think there's a possibility his targets come back down a little bit. Now, Sanders is 34, Beasley is 32. Both of them are Sanders is on a 1-year deal. Beasley's on a deal that can be gotten out of next year and only has 1 year left anyways. I like Gabe Davis a lot long term as the long term wide receiver 2 next to Stefan Diggs. I just caution people, if you're in Dynasty, do not quit early, but you might need to ride out this season as a lot of boom or bust that you're never going to know when to start him. Maybe I like him more in best ball if you don't have to pick out when to start him and you just get the long touchdown weeks. And from an overall value standpoint, I really like Emmanuel Sanders. He's going very, very late. I think that the combination of a lot of people assume Gabe Davis is wide receiver 2, and I think it's definitively Emmanuel Sanders, and that Sanders played last year with Taysom Hill and the ghost of Drew Brees. It's hard to know what he still has left. He looks phenomenal in camp and in practices. Crazy explosive. I think he's in for a nice season, and that combination of getting him a lot, he's going 12th, 13th round, really late in a lot of drafts. I think he's a nice upside swing, and you don't normally describe that with a 34-year-old wide receiver.
Well, this is awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is great insight. Love it. Anything left over for any tight ends?
So I get into this a lot with Bills fans and other content creators in the Bills, Bills universe, is the chicken or the egg with Brian Dable's offense. Does Brian Dable hate tight ends, or does he just create offenses that go to where his talent is? I am of the opinion that he does not have some penchant for hating tight ends, that he would throw the ball to one if the Bills had one that was worthwhile. I do not think the Bills have a tight end 1 on the roster. I'm not a Dawson Knox believer. There are a lot of people, and some people I trust and respect their opinions. He has an elite athletic profile. He is a top-end Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Darren Waller caliber athlete. He can't catch the ball. Like, he just drops the ball too much. And it's happened in practices. He makes amazing, awesome, highlight reel catches and then drops a wide open touchdown. He literally did both those things in practice the other day. And it's those things sit in Josh Allen's mind. Those things sit in Brian Dable's mind. And when you have the embarrassment of riches and all the other people in that receiving core, we didn't even talk about Isaiah McKenzie and some other gadget guys that can get targets. You don't need to scheme a lot of things for the tight end. So coming into the year, I was trying to tell myself that I thought there was going to be a path to, maybe some late round upside of Dawson Knox. I can't swear that it won't happen. It could. Third year is not an uncommon breakout. Tight ends develop longer than other positions. He is an elite athlete. There is ingredients for the recipe of a better story here. I'm not going to be drafting it or investing in it outside of last round best ball stuff of, hey, if you get a weird 8 touchdown season, I'll take the weeks that he scores a touchdown. I was a, aboard the train of kind of wishing that those Zach Ertz rumors came true, and that I thought that he could provide a reliable outlet for Josh Allen is just another option, especially in zone coverage. It's easy to zero in on Cole Beasley, and having two guys that are very good at using leverage and finding space on 3rd and 5 is just one more dangerous weapon there. But it seems like that's fully fizzled out. It looks like he's going to be solidly with the Eagles this year. So I can't recommend any of the Bills tight ends from a draft standpoint. I won't blame someone if you're in a really deep league, a tight end premium league, a 2 tight end league. It's not crazy to take a flyer on Dawson Knox, but there are other late round guys that I'd rather take a stab at, in my opinion.
Let's go to the O line. Is this group kind of in the middle of the road? I think it's in the teens on the Pro Football Focus's preseason rankings. Definitely didn't seem like a problem last year. How do you see this group kind of shaping up this year?
Very similar. They're good at a lot of spots. So the good part is their 3 best offensive linemen are at the 3 most important positions. Their 3 best linemen are left tackle Deion Dawkins, right tackle Darrell Williams, center Mitch Morse. They kind of use a shotgun approach at guard where they have a bunch of different guys competing. They have Cody Ford coming back, who finally looks healthy. He was a top 38 overall pick. Has played injured and moved positions a bunch of times. He looks really good. And the preseason game was the best film I've seen on him since he got here. They brought over Forrest Lamp, who was a top pick for the Chargers on a cheap deal, and then they have John Feliciano and Ike Bacher all kind of competing. None of them are going to be special. I don't even know that any of them are going to be above average, but if you have above average tackles and an above average center and then passable play at guard, in today's NFL you can make that work. You add in when your quarterback is 6'5", 250 and mobile, you can survive a little bit of that as well. He stiff arms Aaron Donald, so he can get himself out of some trouble, sometimes more than I would even like. So ultimately, it's probably the reason that some of the run game capacity is capped a little bit. We're never going to have a dominant Colts, Cowboys, Browns offensive line, but all of the guys are better pass blockers than run blockers, which is the analytics leaning front office that the Bills have. They know what they're good at, and they lean into it. And the guys they have, Deion Dawkins, Darrell Williams, Mitch Morse, are better pass blockers than run blockers. And if I have to pick one, I'll take that one.
Yeah, you keep that guy upright. Keep that number 17 upright. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. The team was pretty kind of, again, middle of the road against the run and the pass. Definitely, standout players like Tre'Davious White back there. How do you see this defense shaping up for 2021? I asked this question specifically for people who are when they're looking at targeting players, in DFS or something like that. Do they have to worry about any particular players shutting them down?
Sure. So I do think that there's probably a little positive regression for the Bills defense. In 2018 and 2019, you're talking about top 2, top 5 defenses from a yardage and points allowed standpoint. They had a lot of bad injury luck last year. So some challenges in getting Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano hurt right off the bat, missing a bunch of games. That was a really tough chunk to take out of the defense, and to be able to go through and kind of set up where they're at. I don't know they're going to go back to top 2, top 5 again, but I actually think they're going to be improved. And then you add in all the investments they made in the defensive line and how good Gregory Rousseau has looked so far. Their first round draft pick, he looks like a monster. That I think there could be a bit of a step forward. So that combination, Tre'Davious White's always been really good. There are stretches where if the pass rush isn't getting home, nobody in the NFL can cover forever, and there's challenges with it. The years where the Bills had a better pass rush and a better overall defense was that marriage where Trey White he's not a Jalen Ramsey athlete, but he might be the best technician in the NFL. He's great at reading the quarterback. He's great at positioning. I think he's the best zone quarterback in the NFL, or cornerback in the NFL. When the pass rush is getting home, that is incredibly valuable, and he's able to, know that he doesn't have to worry about no one's going to have enough time to get behind him and have to chase people down. So some of that could come back into play where he had some of those stretches for a year or two where he was getting Pro Bowl and All Pro votes, and shutting down other teams' best receivers. If the pass rush is getting back there, there's a chance that you may want to be conscious of playing the Bills. But I don't think it's anything you're going to need to worry about. From a team defense standpoint, there are some decent matchups early on. I'm not a huge fan of the Steelers' offense this year. It's early on in the Dolphins. They play the Texans early on. They play the Jaguars 2 games against the Jets. There's some nice matchup plays where you could use the Bills as a cheap late round pick, pairing with another team or from a streaming option standpoint, where I think there'll be some good matchups.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Love that. Love that. Let's do one last fantasy question. Any sleepers that you're looking at from the entire NFL?
So obviously, there's some guys that I find myself leaning towards late, in that I use the Underdog Fantasy app, and I go through and kind of look and see. They do a neat setup where you can see your exposure and who you draft more than other people. So I'll look through there and be like, oh, I guess I do like him. So I am a guy that waits on quarterback all the time. Late, I have a lot of Ryan Fitzpatrick, a lot of Joe Burrow, a lot of Matt Stafford. I think that those are some offenses that could be fun. You can invest in them late. I think that's a good way to lean towards it. I did mention Devin Singletary. I am a believer in him. Out of the higher end running backs, I think Chris Carson's better than other people do. So I end up getting him a lot because I think he's like the last of the truly like trustworthy starting running backs you don't need to worry about. And I also have a lot of Damian Harris. I think that the Patriots are going to really rely on the run game. They signed those 2 tight ends for a reason. They're going to go a lot of 2 tight end, fullback, running back, play action stuff. But I think they're going to use their strong offensive line to run the ball a lot. And I think Damian Harris is going to be the beneficiary of that. I won't blame people if they take some Ramondre Stevenson late as kind of a handcuff or a flyer for that. I like a lot of the secondary receivers on good offenses. So I see myself ending up with a lot of Tyler Boyd and a lot of Michael Gallup and a lot of Mike Williams, and they're almost like the handcuff version of, you people can like Kareem Hunt because, hey, he's playable from a week to week basis, but something happens to Nick Chubb, boom, you got a top 10 guy. I kind of like those, that if something happens to CeeDee Lamb or Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup becomes a top end option. If something happens to Jamar Chase or T Higgins, boom, Tyler Boyd becomes a top option. But they're also playable from a week to week flex standpoint. So I end up with a lot of those kind of guys as the next options in those top end passing offenses. And I mentioned Emmanuel Sanders, guys that are going just cheaper, but they're one step away from actually being in a really valuable spot. I have a lot of those kind of guys, and I would rather lean that way than maybe the number 1 option in an uglier offense of, hey, maybe I want to have Nelson Aguilar or Kenny Galladay or guys like that I'm just not sure. They might be the number 1 option, but I'm not sure that offense is going to produce anything I'm interested in. So sometimes it's weird to take a third option on one team versus a number 1 option on another team. But I think that can be a decent strategy, that if things fall the wrong way for some of the guys ahead of them, you can have a league-winning player. Whereas I don't know that there's any scenario where Kenny Galladay is winning your league. I just don't know that that's or Tyrell Williams is a popular one. He's late and cheap, so there's nothing wrong with Tyrell Williams, but I don't know that the number 1 option on the Lions is going to win anybody their league. I'd rather take a stab at somebody who could really have explosive upside.
No, I love it. I love it. And you mentioned you were talking about Chris Carson being another running back that I like in that range is David Montgomery. He just seemed to have he found an extra step doing some. You were talking about what Devin Singletary did. It sounds like David Montgomery did something very similar.
Well, I use an example for that. I had this discussion with somebody the other day. If you look at slow start, explosive second half of the year, young player. Why is Jonathan Taylor all of a sudden a top, top 10, top 12 pick, and David Montgomery is like a 40th overall pick.
Yeah.
David Montgomery finished fourth overall as RB4 last year, and everybody just gives Jonathan Taylor a pass for a really slow start and an explosive end of the season. David Montgomery did a lot of similar things, and I'm not saying Montgomery should all of a sudden be a 15th overall pick, but their seasons were awful similar last year, and I don't think it's terribly different this year. I think he's a great value if you can get one of the stud running backs and then 2 or 3 receivers and get him as your 4th or 5th pick. I think it's a great way to round out a good starting core.
Yeah, that's been something that I've been trying to target a lot, is getting like a Carson or a Montgomery, and when I go running back receiver early on, and just kind of like in the third or fourth round, getting one of those guys to just kind of solidify the running backs. Yeah, you're right. I mean, people are talking about, Montgomery went against bad teams. It's like, yeah, did you guys see the Jaguars and the Texans at the end of the season that the Colts were going against?
Yeah. Yeah, they still count. And even then, it's still, figuring those things out. And oftentimes, I know some people will be anxious about running quarterbacks taking away from running backs, but a lot of times, a lot of the numbers and analysis shows that adding a running quarterback helps the running back because of that 1 second hesitation that the linebacker doesn't know if you're giving or keeping. I think that Justin Fields can be a boon. The rising tide lifts all boats. I think that he can help that entire offense. I end up finding myself with a fair amount of Darnell Mooney. I didn't mention Allen Robinson when I was talking about number 1 receivers on terrible offenses. I think there's a chance the Bears might not have a terrible offense. I think there's a chance it's passable and decent. And that, I think having pieces of that where the perception is that the offense is going to be bad, maybe it's undersold. The Jaguars are similar for me as well. I think people are underrating how good Trevor Lawrence is going to be compared to what they've had previously, and that overall pieces of that offense cheap might pay off.
Yeah, plus I don't think their defense is going to be particularly good, so they're going to need to throw the ball.
Lots of shootouts.
Oh my goodness. Well, we're going to shoot out with the fun taco question. What are some of your favorite tacos?
Oh, so I do love a variety of things. I was just this past week, I was on a work trip and I was in New York City, and there was a place. I asked the lady at the hotel where I could go. She's like, "Hey, you got to trust me. I'm from San Diego. I know good tacos. You can head down this way. They're legit." And I had some amazing. They were steak street tacos, and man, they were fantastic. So normally I lean more towards beef, I lean more towards that side of things, but I've had some really creative ones with shrimp and with fish, different pieces that you can just do a ton of things. My wife loves a good chicken taco, so we certainly have plenty of them in our house, but I lean more anytime I can have anything with steak, I usually lean that way.
Oh, outstanding. Oh yeah, great. I would expect New York City to have good tacos. Just such a great eating city. Oh,
Yeah.
give me, especially some great carne asada. Oh, love it, Greg. I can't tell you how thankful I am for this. Esto fue un gran placer. Thank you so much for taking the time and breaking down the Bills for us. Can you share with our Familia community where they can find your great content?
Absolutely. Come over. You could find me at Greg Tompsett on Twitter. You can find us at cover1.net. Anywhere that you're looking for podcasts, you can search for the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You can search for the Cover One Fantasy podcast. We have our own YouTube channel under Cover One. So come on over, check us out. We do a lot of draft work. So if you're into different teams, obviously our fantasy show is across the league. Our draft work is across the league. I personally do a lot of work on the Bills as well, but there's plenty of other stuff outside of the Bills. You guys would be worthwhile to check it out.
Oh, yeah. Definitely give them a follow, everybody. Definitely give them a follow. Otra vez, eso es todo for our show. Special thanks to Anchor for being our hosting network and putting out our podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify. Please make sure you subscribe. Also, muchas gracias to YouTube for putting our podcast on video and putting our faces out there. Please make sure to hit subscribe. Give us a like when you get a chance. Por favor. Also, otra vez, Greg, thank you. And you can find our original content at familiaffb.com. And you can find me at Jorge Martin 17 just right here. And as well as at familiaffb on Twitter and Instagram. Otra vez, Greg, un gran placer to have you on. Thank you so much. And remember, everybody, todos somos familia.